Guys, please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on the screen. Guys, please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on the screen. Those are attending in online. Guys, please check it. All of you get my voice on the screen. Those who are attending in online. And GVM Prabhakar and Ramudu Tetakala. Please rejoin with webinar with Durgasoft provided ID number. Can you please rejoin with webinar with Durgasoft provided ID number? Okay. All right. Good morning, guys. And check it what we completed in the last session. What topics can we understand there? So I think so we are discussing about steps to prepare steps to prepare. Already we completed servlet applications. Servlets design we are understanding there. In the servlets design, all right, first approach of preparing servlets already we understand. In the first approach of preparing servlets, how to prepare servlet class, how to access, how to deploy servlet, and how to access that. All the things can be understood, right? All right, sir. Then out of all this total, an internal flow I have to discuss there. So already I given some diagrammatic representation for it. Servlet internal flow 1. Already we have seen this flow of execution, right? The total flow of execution we understood in the last session. So now today I want to prepare a document by giving explanation for each and every point again and again. Now try to understand this clearly. First of all, I'm asking one question to you. Now try to answer for it. Anyway, I'm going to prepare a document here. Now try to see this document. What I'm going to prepare here, observe carefully. First of all, I'm telling to you, when we start the server, then main server, when we start server, then main server will perform, main server and container. And a container will perform the following actions. What actions that main server or container is performing there? Guys, now tell me, now check it in the diagram. Already shown this point here. What exactly the points here we discussed there? See this one. When we start the server, main server will recognize all the web applications which are available under web apps folder. Main server will deploy all these web applications into the server space. While deployment of the application, container will search for deployment descriptor with the name web.xml under web folder. Then if it is identified, container will perform XML loading, XML reading, XML parsing, and reading the content from web.xml file and storing that application data by creating an object. That object is what there? Servlet context object. This is what exactly the work is going on when we start the server. Clear or not? Right. So let me have some points about it now. Try to understand it now. First of all, main server will main server will recognize and deploy all the web applications which exist at web apps folder in a Tomcat. Alright, sir. Which exists in the web apps folder in a Tomcat. That is like what their first step. Next one is what there at the time of web application deployment. At the time of web application deployment, container will recognize deployment descriptor. Container will search for deployment descriptor. Will search for deployment descriptor with the name with the web.xml file name under web-inf folder. Okay. If web.xml file is existed, then container will perform loading, parsing, and reading the data from web.xml file. That's it. Observe carefully. If the web.xml file exists, then the container will perform loading, parsing, and reading the content from the web.xml file. Okay. In the web.xml file, if any application data is existed, then container will store that application data by creating a separate object called servlet context object. All right. Here I need to give a small note. What is that note point here? I'm telling to you. Observe carefully. So this is like a standard point. Everybody has to understand this point. What is the note here? I'm telling there. Observe carefully. In web applications, in general, a separate servlet context object will be created for each and every applications which are deploying in the server space, which are deploying in the server space. In general, a separate servlet context object will be created for each and every application which is deploying in the server space. Alright, sir. For every deployed application, a separate servlet context object will be created. So, for example, 100 applications are available under web apps folder. All 100 applications will be deployed into the server space. At the time of deployment, a separate object will be created for each and every web application. That object is what there? Servlet context object. Now here itself I am telling there. If you want to share any data throughout one application, keep the data in servlet context object. The servlet context object will share the data throughout the application, not to a particular resource. Through the entire application, we are able to provide some shareability. So for that particular reason, we are going to use what there? Servlet context object. Anyway, servlet context is a separate topic for us. Servlet context is what there? A separate topic. There we are going to discuss much more about it. But as of now, our awareness should be what there. For the entire application, a separate object will be created. That object is called as what there? Servlet context object. Remember this. Next one after that. So at the time of server startup, what happened that we understood there. Next one is what there after completion of this. After this server startup, we have to submit a request from client. Okay, if you submit request from client to the server, what protocol will do now? This part here we have to understand. Now let's see this point here. What exactly the work that protocol can do here? When I submit some request from client browser to the server, protocol will take the request. Protocol will establish a virtual socket connection between client and server. Then protocol will create what it will create there request format it able to create request format. In that request format, headers and body parts are available. Header is able to manage request headers data. Body part is able to manage user parameters, what user has provided the data. Once request format is created, protocol will carry that request format to the server. Okay, now main server what it will do, later on we will think about it. So this flow already we are aware clearly. Let's see this one. Now the point is like what there. After the server startup, or after the web application deployment, if we send request from client to server, protocol will take that request and the protocol will perform the following actions. What action that protocol is able to perform? All right, sir. After the server startup or after the web application deployment, if you send a request from client to the server, then protocol will take that request and protocol will perform the following actions. What are the various actions that protocol is able to perform? First, protocol will establish a virtual socket connection between client and server on the basis of server IP address and server port number. Right. So connection will be created. Next one is what their protocol will create request format. Containing what they now tell me here request header containing header pot and body pot. I have to give some clarity. What is there inside the header pot? What is there inside the body pot? Where header pot is able to manage request headers like metadata about the client browser. Like what is metadata about the client browser? Metadata about the client browser, such as browser name, that is client name, indirectly browser name in the sense client name. Next one is encoding mechanisms which are supported by the present client. Then after that, local details of the client browser and so on. All right, sir. Next one is what there. After completion of this, another point here, what I am telling there after this, where body part is able to manage request parameters data. Like what data, like user provided data at the user forms in a browser. Right, sir. User provided data at a user forms in a browser. Like what data here now? Like username, comma, password, data in a login form, and so on. This type of data. Observe carefully in the browser. Right, so now this is about exactly the point here what I'm telling to you. Understand it. Protocol will create request format containing header part and body part, where a header part is able to manage request headers like metadata about the client browser, such as browser name, encoding mechanisms which are supported by the present client, local details of the client browser, and so on. Where body part is able to manage request parameters data like user provided data at user forms in the browser, such as like what their username, password, data in login forms, and so on. So many. Right, sir. Now, what next one here? Protocol will carry request format to the server, server mission, server mission. Protocol will carry request format to the server mission. That's it. Then after that, what next one here we have to understand there. This part is okay, fine. What protocol is doing, that finally request is coming to the main server. So when server receives a request from client, main server will perform the following actions. What actions this main server is able to perform there, guys? Observe carefully. When server receives a request from a client, the main server will perform the following actions. What actions this main server is able to perform there? Observe carefully. Alright, sir. Now in the diagram, I give in clarity. Alright, so first of all, main server will take the request. Main server will validate the request. It will check whether this request is good or bad. Okay, if the request is bad, there itself, main server will send some error response to the respective client. In the case, if the request is good request, that request format, request data, everything is proper, then main server will check this request is coming for any static resource or dynamic resource. If the request is coming for static resource, no, main server will handle that request. Just it will get the copy of a static resource and it will send that copy as a response to the respective client. In the case if the request is coming for a particular dynamic resource like servlet, no, immediately main server will forward that request to the container. Remaining part, container will take the responsibility. All right, now let's see this point here. All right, so main server will check whether the request is good or not. All right, sir, if the request is good or not, if the request is a proper request or not, request is good or not. If the request is not good, that means some mistakes are available in the request. No, if the request is not good, then main server will send some error response, to the respective client. Main server will send some error response to the respective client. One point here. In the case, if the incoming request is proper, then main server will check whether the request is coming for a static resource or a dynamic resource. Now tell me, if the incoming request is proper, then main server will check whether the request is coming for a static resource like HTML file and so on, or a dynamic resource like servlets, JSPs, and so on. Maybe JSP is also a dynamic resource. Fine. Next point, what I'm telling there, if the incoming request is for a particular static resource, for a particular static resource, then what main server will do? Then main server, then the main server will identify the static resource at the server side application, and will send main server will send the content of the static resource as a response to the client, as a response to the respective client. That means, in a simple words, if the incoming request is coming for a particular static resource, then main server will handle that request. That's it. What is the meaning of handling that request now? Get the copy of the static resource, send that content as a response to the respective client. Point is very much clear. Next one is, what is the next point here now? Observe carefully. If the incoming request is for a particular dynamic resource like servlet, directly I'm taking example is what there servlet. If the incoming request is for a particular dynamic resource like servlet, then what main server will do now? Then main server will forward. Then main server will forward request to the container, to the what there container. That's it. Now this is like the point here we can understand now. Will forward the request to the container. Got it or not? Now what container will do now? Now anyway, the total flow is coming to what there container. Now what container will do? First, container will recognize application name and the resource name from the URL, from the request format, from the request data. So application name and URL. Container will go to the application where container will identify the URL. So if it is an URL in the sense URL pattern. So if it is an URL pattern, container must know for which servlet this request is coming. To know the name and location of the servlet, container will go to the web.xml file where it will search for the servlet configuration which contains the same URL pattern what client has been submitted. If any servlet has the same URL pattern, then container will identify the name and location of the servlet class. Then container will search for the respective servlet class under classes folder. If it is not available here, container will search for the servlet class under the jar files which are available under web apps folder which are available under the lib folder inside the web folder. In lib folder we are going to write under the web folder to maintain some jar files now. Yes, sir. All of you are getting it or not? So this is that another level, another point about like what their container. Try to understand this clearly. What I am giving there now. When main server send a request to the container will perform the following actions. Container will perform the following actions. Right, sir. What are the various actions which are performed by container? No. First, container will get application name and resource name from the request format. Request format in the sense from request, where request format is available from request format. So container will get the application name and a resource name from the request format. That means which application name and which resource name here, and be specific. Container will get the requested application name and resource name from the request format. Okay. Instead of saying this requested, any other word here, container will get the application name and resource name from the request format which client wants to access. That's nice. Which client wants to access. That's point number one. Then what next one here? No, container container will check whether the request is coming for a servlet or not, why I'm telling this, the request is coming for servlet or not. Now at present our concentration is on what their servlet. Of course servlet is one of the dynamic resource, JSP is what there another dynamic resource. Answer my point here. Out of these two, know for which component that request is coming. If it is a JSP page, no, directly container will search for JSP page under web apps folder directly. But if it is a servlet, no, then container should know the name and location of the servlet class. The details are available under what their web.xml file. That's why here container will check whether request is coming for a servlet or not. Okay. If the request is coming, if the request is coming for a servlet, then container will go to web.xml file in web.inf folder. Container will go to web.xml file in web.inf folder, and container will search for the respective servlet configuration containing the user provided, containing client provided URL pattern. Right, sir. Client provided URL pattern. All of you are getting this point here. Container will check whether request is coming for a servlet or not. All right, sir. If the request is coming for a servlet, then container will go to web.xml file in web.inf folder, and container will search for the respective servlet configuration containing the client provided URL pattern. Got it or not? All right. What next one here now? If the container identifies any servlet configuration, container will go to web.xml folder, container will search for the respective servlet configuration. Right. If the container identifies any servlet configuration in web.xml file with the client provided URL pattern, then container will get name and location of the servlet class. Container will get name and location of the servlet class. After that, after getting this information there, then what next one here? Alright, configuration in web.xml file. Right. Then what next point here after completion of this? Alright, sir. What next point here after understanding this point here? Container must search for the servlet class or not? Alright. Now container will search for the servlet class dot class file under classes folder, under the jar files which are existed in lib folder, in applications lib folder. That's it. Under the classes folder which exist in the applications lib folder. That's okay, fine. Here the point is what there. If the required servlet dot class file is not identified, container will raise an exception. That's the point here. If the required servlets dot class file is not existed, if the required servlets dot class file is not existed at both the locations, then container will raise an exception. container will raise an exception like what there? Jakarta dot servlet dot, what next one, sir? Jakarta dot servlet dot servlet exception with the root cause java dot lang dot class not found exception, something else. Dot class file is not available in the sense that this kind of thing here we are able to get. All right, sir. That's it. Now this is a point here I'm telling there. For example, then what next one here? If container identifies the servlet dot class file at either of these locations, what container will do? Simple. Container will execute the servlet by following servlet lifecycle. Now see this, what is the servlet lifecycle here? What we are getting there? When a dot class file is identified here, then immediately what container will do? Servlet loading. Then what next one here? Servlet initialization. Next one is what there? Servlet initialization. After that, request processing phase, creating a thread and accessing what method there? Service method. But to access service method, request and response objects are created. By passing request and response objects to the service method will be executed. By the execution of service method, response will come to the response object. When a thread comes to the ending point of the service method, the thread will come to the data state. Then immediately container will dispatch response from response object to the main server. Main server will send that response to like what their protocol. So how main server is submitting the response to the client, that is later on. But first of all, servlet lifecycle here we have to understand or not. All right, so now let's see this point here clearly. All right, so when container identifies the required servlet class dot class file at either of the above locations, then container will execute servlet class by using the following lifecycle actions. What are the lifecycle actions here? We are able to understand. Right. The lifecycle actions would be like what then? First one is servlet loading. That's it. What is this first one here? No, servlet loading. Servlet loading. What is the meaning of this servlet loading actually? What we are understanding there? No. Container will load servlet class bytecode to the memory. Right? All of you are getting my point here. Container will load servlet class bytecode to the memory. Point number 2. After the servlet loading, servlet initialization. What is the meaning of this servlet initialization here now? Observe carefully here. Container will create object for the loaded servlet class. Alright. Then after that, we'll create an object for the loaded servlet class. Point number 3, servlet initialization. Servlet initialization. What container will do here? Inside the servlet initialization, container will create servlet config object, and container will access init method by passing the generated servlet config object. Here in the form of a simple note, if you want to understand what is servlet config object, no, I want to give some clarity now. Try to understand this clearly. Container will create a servlet config object, and container will access init method by passing the generated servlet config object. Now the simple point about the servlet config, no, servlet config object is able to provide the respective servlets respective servlet configuration details like logical name of the servlet, comma, initialization parameters, and so on. So servlet config object is for one particular servlet. Servlet context object is for the entire one application. Application level is what there, servlet context. Servlet level is what there, servlet config. For example, I have a single application. In that application, 100 servlets are available. So how many servlet config objects are created? How many servlet context objects are created? One application, 100 servlets are available. How many servlet context objects are created? Only one. For the entire, when application is deployed, only one servlet context object will be created. But inside this servlet, inside the application, how many servlets are available? 100 servlets are available. So how many servlet config objects are creating? No, 100 servlet config objects are creating. 100 servlet config objects are creating. Yes, sir, got it or not? So this is the point here we have to understand clearly. All right, sir, that's okay, fine. Now finally here what we are getting there, servlet initialization is completed there. Next one is what there, after that, after the servlet initialization, next point is what there, request to processing. Request to processing. What is the meaning of this request to processing? What is the meaning of this request to processing? No, observe carefully. All right, sir. After the servlet initialization, container will create a thread. Container will create a thread. In bracket, I'm telling that in the future we can understand it. No, all right. Getting thread from thread pool. Creating a thread is nothing but what there, server is maintaining thread pool. From the thread pool, thread will be taken. Right, sir. Even if you're not understanding this point here, no need to think much about it. Okay, but it's a concept. Thread pooling is one of the concept from where the thread is coming there now. All right. Then after that, so container will create a thread. Okay. Then what container has to do there? Container will access service method. Container will create. Before that, container will create request and response objects. Container will create request and response objects and access service method. And access what method there? Service method. Now here I want to give a small note. Understand this clearly. All right, sir. Now that means a request object is able to manage request to data, and a response object is able to have the dynamic response which we are going to generate from service method. That's enough. This is the note here we have to understand. Okay. Right. This is a small note. Here we have to recognize the point here. All right. Then after this, after completion of this, then what next point here? Now observe carefully. Request processing is what there. Service method is called here. Okay. That means as part of the request processing, first of all, servlet request and response objects are created. Then after that, accessing service method by passing these request and response objects. As of now, request object contains the request to data. But by the execution of service method, response will be generated in a response object. That's why given note, request object is able to manage request data. Response object is able to have the dynamic response which you are going to generate from the service method. All right. Now, as part of this, what next point here I'm telling there, no, after this, container will create request and response objects and access service method. Here itself I'm telling there, by the execution of service method, By the execution of service method, container will keep some response. By the execution of service method, container will keep some response in the response object. That's it. The note I given what request object is able to manage and what response is generated clearly. All right, sir. Then after that, after completion of this particular point, what next one here I'm telling there? In the request processing phase, I'm telling there, when a container comes to that means when container generated thread comes to the end of the service method, then what next one can know? Container will understand clearly response. Request processing is completed, then container will dispatch that response to like what their main server. Got it or not? All right. So now here itself I'm telling there, when container generated thread reach to the service method ending point, when container generated thread reach to the service method ending point, what container will do? No, the container will dispatch response. Container will dispatch response to the main server. Container will dispatch that response to the main server. All right, sir. Then what next one get? Then after this, after completion of this particular one, that's request processing. Now request processing is completed. Or else maybe here I want to give that step number 5. Right here we can understand the step number 5. Here are given. What's the point here? When container generated that reach to the service method ending point, container will dispatch response to the main server. Okay. Then what main server will do here after this? No. All right. When a response reached to the main server, then main server will send a response to the protocol, where protocol will send a response to the client, where main server will send protocol will send response to the client with the following steps. What exactly the steps are provided here? Now let's see this one, all the steps now. Right, sir. What are the various steps? Now tell me here, inside this, what main server is doing there? Main server is sending a response to the protocol. Protocol, what it will create there? First of all, protocol will create, or what it will create there? No, a response format. In the response format, what parts are available there? Header part and body part is available. Header part is able to manage what there? Response of headers data. Then what body part is able to manage their dynamic response. Protocol will carry that response format to the client. When a response reaches to the client browser is able to take the response and it is able to display the response to the user. When response is reached to the client browser, after that, immediately protocol will terminate the connection. What that virtual socket connection, what that logical connection is established already, the connection will be terminated. That's the work of the protocol. Got it or not? Now let's see this punch here. So point number 1, protocol will prepare a response format containing header part and body part, where header part is able to manage response of headers data. Header part is able to manage response of headers data, such as response of headers data is what there. Now tell me, right, size of the response and type of the response and so on, comma, where body part is able to manage the actual dynamic response which is generated by the present servlet. The actual dynamic response which is generated by the present servlet. Observe carefully now. This is what exactly the meaning of what their protocol, first step here. Then after that, what next one here? What protocol will do the next one now? protocol will carry a responsive format to observe carefully. Protocol will carry responsive format to what there to the client where client is able to get response from response format, and client is able to display response to the user. That's okay, fine. This is completed. Next one is what there when response reached to the client, protocol will terminate the socket connection which already established. All right, sir. This is what exactly the point here we can understand. When a response reaches to the client, protocol will terminate the socket connection which is already established. All right, sir. Whenever this protocol terminates this connection, immediately what container will do? Container will have some other responsibilities. That means cleanup responsibilities are available for container. Container has to clean up the resources, objects, what it has created there previously. Then immediately, when protocol terminates the connection, container will perform the following actions. What protocol is able to perform the actions here? Observe carefully. All right, sir. Now understand this point clearly. On the diagram here, and we specify this. When this connection is terminated, first immediately container will destroy request and response objects. Then after that, it will go with what there some waiting state. How long it will be in waiting state? No, that depends on the server implementation. That is not in our hand. After completion of that waiting state, it will check if any request is coming for this particular servlet or not. If no request is coming for this particular servlet, immediately container will destroy servlet config object. Immediately container will destroy what object there? Servlet object. This is called as what there? Servlet deinitiation. This is exactly called as what there? Servlet deinitiation. Right. This is also a life cycle. After that, after completion of this, container will unload the servlet bytecode from the memory. This is called as what there? Servlet unloading. Then after that, when we undeploy the web application or when we shut down the server, container will destroy which object there? No, servlet context object. It will destroy servlet context object. That's it. Right. So now let's see this point here clearly. When a protocol terminates the connection, container will perform the following actions. What are the various actions here? First, container, what it will do there? Container will destroy request and response objects. Container will destroy what objects there? Request and response objects. Container will go to waiting time. Container will go to some waiting time. That means that is called as what there? Ideal time. Container will go to what there? Ideal time. What is the meaning of this ideal time? Waiting for the further request now. All right, sir. After the waiting time, container will check whether any request is available for the same servlet or not. Okay, any request is available for the same servlet or not. If any request is existed, then container will process that request. By creating another set of request and response objects. If any another request is coming there, then container will process that request by creating another set of request and response objects. That's okay. Now, this is the point here we have to understand. For example, if no request is available for the same servlet, then what container will do now? If no request is available for the same servlet, then container will destroy servlet config object, then servlet object, This phase is called servlet deinstantiation. This phase is called what there? Servlet deinstantiation. Observe carefully. This phase is what there? Servlet deinstantiation. It's one of the life cycle phase. Okay. Then after this, when servlet object is completed, when servlet object is destroyed, what next point here we have to understand there? Now tell me. Right, sir. What next point here we have to understand there? All right. When we okay, then after servlet deinstantiation, container will remove servlet bytecode from the container's operational memory. So now here I am telling that this phase is called servlet unloading. Right, sir. This phase is what there? Servlet unloading. Right, this is completed. Next one is after that. When servlet unloading is completed, then what next one here? If we undeploy the web application, or or if we shut down the server, in both the cases, shut down the server, then container will destroy which object now? Servlet context object. There ends the story. This is total flow of execution. The total content here I have given there. Now try to understand. Only for first flow of execution, we are going to give this much of flow of execution. Otherwise, for every servlet, we are not going to discuss that. One time, I am giving the total text document. So why I am giving this much of details here? The point is like what I am telling to you. Whenever we have seen that flow of execution, maybe in the next 1 week of time, by seeing this diagram easily, we can understand this diagrammatic representation. After 1 month of time, maybe after 1 year of time, if you want to check this lightly, you may understand the light content, but some connections you are going to miss out. Some connections we may miss out if you see the diagram even after 1 year of time. But if the text data is available, one time if we visit the total text data, again we will re-establish our connections. Automatically you are able to recollect it. That's why given the total text data. Anyway, now try to understand one time here. But anyway, this title diagram also here I'm going to copy here. So there I'm going to provide you. Now try to understand this clearly. Damn sure question. In every interview, if interviewer wants to ask questions on servlets, this is mandatory question or damn sure question. Everybody must understand this point clearly. All right, sir. Now this is the point now. And when I discuss about this servlet interface methods, previously I discussed about servlet interface methods, right? I discussed it, right? Before servlet's creation, I discussed about servlet interface methods. How many methods are available here now? 5 methods inside the servlet interface. Init method, service method, get servlet config method, get servlet info method. Next one is this time method. Got it or not? 5 methods are available or not? One small terminology is available. Now try to understand this. What is the simple point here? Out of these 5 methods, only 3 methods are involved in a servlet life cycle. Remaining 2 methods are not involved. So life cycle methods of the servlet interface are init method, service method, destroy method. But non-life cycle methods of the servlet life cycle is what there? Get servlet config and get servlet info. Just that is a point here I missed actually. I need to give that point here now. All right, sir. From the above servlet interface methods, all of you observe carefully. From the above servlet interface methods, init method, okay, the methods like init method, service method, then what next one here? Destroy method are involved in a servlet life cycle. So these methods are called life cycle methods. These methods are called as what? Their life cycle methods. From the above servlet interface methods, the methods like init method, service method, and destroy method are involved in servlet life cycle. So these methods are called servlet life cycle methods. The remaining methods like get servlet config method and get servlet info method are called non-life cycle methods. That's understand this clearly. That methods are called as what? They're non-life cycle methods. That's it. So this is overall information here we have to understand about the content here. We can understand clearly now. Sir, got it or not? There's a total information here. Fine. Anyway, the total servlet life cycle and its internal flow, everything here we covered here, but the remaining part is yours only. What I'm requesting to everybody, the first servlet program here we understood there. So the first servlet program design, program execution, as well as its internal flow of execution, everything you must aware. Every corner of this flow of execution you must aware. Then only you are going to understand the remaining content. Otherwise, you are unable to understand. Don't neglect it. But you have to practice this flow of execution. How you are going to practice it? No. Don't think. Just don't think about the diagram just by seeing the diagram. No. So close your resource there. Keep aside now. Then take one white paper. In that white paper, try to draw the diagram with the explanation internally. Then only we are able to get it. Like this, 2 to 3 attempts we may take, but try to complete the diagram here with the explanation. Got my point or not? So anyway, text data also we are given there. Then the remaining part is yours. We can understand it clearly. All right, sir. Next one. After completion of this, all of you observe carefully. Drawback with this first approach. There is a drawback with this first approach. Now tell me here. In the first approach of creating servlets, what we have done there? Just we implemented servlet interface or not? We implemented servlet interface or not? In the servlet interface implementation, all of you observe carefully. When we implement this servlet, how many methods we must implement there inside the servlet class now? 5 methods here we must implement. Am I right or not? Now tell me, out of these 5 methods, which method we required mainly? Which method is our main method? Is our required method? Service method. Service method is our required method or not? Understand my point here? Service method is our required method or not? So mainly we required what method here? Service method. So because of only one service method, we are implementing servlet interface where we are implementing all methods implementation with or without the requirement because of only one service method. So this approach will increase number of unnecessary methods in a servlet's design or not? In a servlet's development, number of unnecessary methods here we are implementing or not? Yes, definitely number of unnecessary methods implementation is provided. So it will increase burden to the developers. It will increase burden to the developers. To overcome this problem only, To overcome this problem only, Servlet API has provided an alternative. That alternative is available in the form of generic servlet. That alternative is available in the form of what there? Generic servlet. That's the purpose of moving toward their generic servlet. Now let's see this one. Drawback with this approach is what there? In this approach, we have to implement servlet interface. In this approach, we have to implement what there? Servlet interface, where we must provide implementation for all 5 methods. Right? We must provide implementation for all 5 methods, irrespective of the actual requirement. Irrespective of the actual requirement. So this approach, irrespective of the actual requirement of service method. Point is clear, right? Irrespective of the actual requirement of service method. So this approach will increase unnecessary methods implementation in a servlet classes. It will increase burden to the developers. Unnecessary methods in the sense it's not at all necessary. It will increase burden to the developers. It will increase burden to the developers. That's it. Right, sir. Now this is the drawback here now. But to overcome this drawback, we have to go with what there? Generic servlet. The simple point I'm telling there. To overcome the above problem, we have to use generic servlet. We have to use what there? Generic servlet provided by Servlet API. That's it. Right, sir. There we have to introduce what there? Generic servlet. Right, sir. Then how generic servlet is going to be happen? How we are going to work with this generic servlet, that we have to understand now. Now the topic is like what there? Second approach of creating servlet. First approach of creating servlet is completed. Next one is what there? Second approach of creating servlet. By using generic servlet. Or else we can write the point here. Instead of writing this total content like this, no, what I'm telling there, servlets design by using generic servlet. That's it. This topic here we have to understand. All right, sir. But for this topic onwards, I will not give that much of flow of execution and all. Diagram I will provide there, but text to data will not give that much of no. Right? The same, almost all similar, but except one or two locations, small changes. That's it. This was generic servlet, and next one is what there? HTTP servlet. Only small changes are going to be available. That we are going to understand clearly. All right, sir. Now, first of all, understand it clearly. What exactly this generic servlet? Understand this point here. Then we need to have a separate discussion about it, no? But later on, I'll go for it. But understand it. What is this generic servlet? How this generic servlet is available now? Right now, understand this clearly. Generic servlet is provided by the servlet API in the form of Java Java generic servlet, or what next one you know, Jakarta generic servlet. Guys, understand one more point here I'm telling to you. Maybe Tomcat 10.0 is supporting directly what there and this Jakarta project. The moment when I'm going to use IDE, Eclipse IDE, there it may take by default what there Java servlet package. There time to time we have to change that package name. IDE is giving default support maybe for what there Java X, but server is supporting for what there Jakarta, where some difference is going to be happen. By the time we have to import Jakarta project only. We should not import what there Java X project. By default, ID will search for Java X project, but it is provided with what that Jakarta project. So because of that reason, we have to change that import statements number of times now. I will show that whenever we are going to prepare applications with Eclipse ID, there I'm able to show how to import, how to implement this kind of content here. All of you are getting it now? Alright, so now this is like what there. Now observe carefully. Generic servlet is provided by servlet API in the form of Java X dot servlet dot generic servlet or Jakarta dot servlet dot generic servlet. That's okay, fine. But what is this generic servlet actually? What is this one actually? Generic servlet is an abstract class. Generic servlet is what there is an abstract class. Clear or not? It's an what there an abstract class, comma. It is an implementation. It is an implementation abstract class to servlet interface. Even though it is an abstract class, but it is an implementation abstract class to what there servlet interface. Then it has provided all the servlet interface methods implementation except a service method. Except what method they know? Service method. Every method of servlet interface has been implemented except what their service method. Understand my point here? In a generic servlet abstract class, still service method is an abstract method that must be implemented by the subclasses of generic servlet. Subclasses of generic servlet abstract class. For this, because of this particular reason only, that service method is still abstract method. Actually, developer required which method there? Service method. There only we are going to keep our application logic. So that service method kept as what there? Kept as an abstract method because of providing developer required implementation. Of course, if the method is normal method, service method, implemented method, where developer has to overwrite. Developer may override, may not override. Optional case will come. In the case of overriding, optional case will come. But if the method is an abstract method, it's mandatory to implement it. It's mandatory to override that method. Mandatory concept will come to the picture. That's why generic servlet abstract class made service method still is what their abstract method, where developer must implement that method in the subclasses of the generic servlet. Yes, sir. All of you get my point or not? Normal class overriding, abstract class overriding, interface methods overriding, lot of difference is available. Normal class overriding is not guaranteed one. Developer may override, may not override. Even if he is not overriding that normal class method, nothing is going to be happen. But if it is an abstract class and abstract method, then we must override it. We must override it. Understand my point here? In the case of interfaces also, if any abstract method is available, we must implement it. We must override that. So where mandatory conditions will come. But in the case of normal class and subclass, no, method overriding is not mandatory. It is an optional. Even if you are not overriding that, no compiler will give an error. No exception will come there from the JVM. But in the case of abstract classes and abstract methods, if you are not overriding that abstract class, abstract method inside the subclasses, no, definitely error will come for us. Definitely we are able to get what their compilation error. This is what exactly the point here we can understand. Anyway, that we are going to understand later on. In a generic servlet abstract class, still service method is an abstract method that must be implemented by the subclasses of generic servlet abstract class. A developer must implement that method as per their requirement in the subclasses of generic servlet. Right, sir? That must be implemented by the developers as per their application requirement in the subclasses of the generic servlet abstract class. That's it. More meaning here we are able to get. Right? All right, sir. Then remaining points I will discuss with them tomorrow, guys. Then there is some content here. I need to discuss some point here. Now, let me go for one more point. After that, I will tomorrow will discuss there. What's the point here? Generic servlet is an idea. Is an idea. Is an idea coming from. Is an idea came from adapter design pattern. Generic servlet is an idea came from what there? Adapter design pattern. Now here we have to explain more. Here we have to explain more. The simple word came from which design pattern? No, adapter design pattern. In core Java, I explain about adapter design pattern. We have seen that. Number of times we have seen that. Even in the GUI part also, we explain that adapter design pattern. Similarly, like what there in the part of the object orientation, we have seen adapter design pattern. So now it is much useful to understand this generic servlet. Example for adapter design pattern, adapter class is what there? Generic servlet. In the case of Geo also, window adapter class is available. Window adapter class, mouse adapter is available, keyboard adapter is available. All these are adapter classes. But one of the example for adapter is what there? Generic servlet. But how generic servlet is an adapter class, how it is available, this points here we have to understand. So there some explanation is required. So tomorrow we are going to understand about this adapter classes and as well as like what the generic servlet, abstract class, more content here. So tomorrow we are going to see the programming part with the generic servlet, how much it is very simple for us to prepare the applications now. After understanding that, we will see the drawbacks with the generic servlet also. To overcome the drawbacks, we'll move on to HTTP servlet. The step-by-step approach is available. We are going to understand that. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot. We'll meet on tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll see the recommending points. Thank you. Our content understand it is a URL pattern by seeing URL, sir. Which, if there is no web.xml file annotation, then the container creates servlet context object. Sure, Jayant Agarwal. Then by recognize the annotation, then it will create it. It will not search for web.xml file, then it will recognize annotations there, then it will search for it. Sure. Okay. Thank you.